Hello, my Cactus crew. This is Captain Cactus from Captain Cactus Games, and welcome back to my ongoing Minerscave 1.5 series on Roblox. Now, for those of you who don't know, the servers for this game, I guess there was an update, but my private server was gone, and a lot of other people have had their entire games wiped, similar to mine, unfortunately. So basically I've had to start my entire world over. Now in my case, this is not a big issue because, to be completely honest, for the first 20 episodes of this series, there really hasn't been a lot of spectacular builds, so to say. They've been more of little experimental builds, nothing too spectacular. Since the update to this game, I've decided to take a more ambitious approach to the current builds I'm doing. Instead of making these little insignificant builds that are really small, like a couple paths or a small wall, I've decided to make more ambitious, daring, spectacular builds. And that is what you are seeing currently. This is the first of many, many builds I'm going to be making moving forward. This is my Cactus Barn. Clever name, huh? And this is the first of many builds that I have just stated. Now, as you can see, it is overly exaggerated from the front. The doors, both of the hinge doors on the front, are extremely large, but once we get inside, the barn is a bit more scaled down, if you understand what I mean. It's not so grand scale on the inside, and you can see there are the various supporting beams. You have the slight details on the floor with the mix of cobblestone and dirt, and then you have the stalls. And because, as far as I'm concerned, there are no animals in this game, so I took the liberty of putting stalls for cactuses, stalls for crafting tables, stalls for sand, stalls for storage chests, stalls for just wood in general. And I've used these stalls to place various resources for decoration purposes. I've even done so at the beginning of the barn and the far end of the bottom floor. You can see there is a lot of decorative ideas and just things to spice up the barn on the inside. Now, on the second floor, the walls are lined with cactus in certain areas, divided by supporting beams. Now you might be wondering, why did I build this barn on a little dirt plateau out in the middle of the water? Why didn't I build it on land? Wouldn't that have been more convenient to do so? Well, I haven't truly experimented with this yet, but before the patch came out, I had chopped down an entire forest, right? Forest of jungle trees in my previous world. And when you would log out of the server and log back in, the leaves would reappear. Like the trunk of the tree would be gone, but the leaves would be floating. So you get these bundles of leaf UFOs floating in the sky overhead, just many, many of them. And it doesn't matter how much you destroy them. Every time you would log out of the server and log back in, they would reappear. Now this barn is going to serve as the entryway for the many, many other builds that I build in this series. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, you know how in your stereotypical amusement park, you have this big, grand scale set piece when you walk right in to kind of get your attention and make you go, wow, this place is so awesome. Well, I'm going to be doing something along those lines. I'm not making an amusement park per se, I'm making a sort of metropolis out of different structures it builds, and the barn is going to be the entryway into those various locations. You're going to come through the front of the barn, over the storage chests and the crafting tables into the barn. You can look around, explore, and then at the back, I'm going to readjust that wonky stairwell that I built that kind of goes up to the second floor, and I'm going to build an entryway, probably a tunnel, that's going to lead to the various other builds that I'm going to build. Now, during the construction of this build, I used jungle logs, oak logs, birch logs. Those are the three main types of wood that I use during this build. There are, I believe, dark oak logs that I don't know if they've been added into the game during the update or I just never came across them before. But I came across a few dark oak trees, but I decided not to use any of the wood in this particular build, focusing on the three that I have mentioned previously. I wanted this barn to be modeled after a real life barn, but I didn't want it to be tied so closely to the structure and build of a real life barn that I didn't have the freedom to do what I wanted to do with it. In other words, I based it off it, but I also implemented my own little fun ideas and things into the appearance of it. And as far as the result turned out, I am very happy with the final result of this barn. I would have made the barn red like a more traditional barn, but as far as I'm aware, there isn't a solid red block in the game that's easy to obtain, so I decided to go for a brown barn instead, which I do think looks nice. Now, in regards to the massive, overly exaggerated barn slide doors on the front of the barn, originally the borders around those were made of birch logs and not ice. So you might ask, why did I change it from birch logs to ice? Well, the answer is because I didn't like the combination of the white with the black spots on the birch logs. I wish that they were all white all the way down, all the way up, every direction, basically the whole thing white for more consistency. But unfortunately, they have the black spots on them, so I decided to use ice instead. And yes, I know that there are line streaks in the ice, and the ice has a bluish hue to it, but I preferred this over the birch logs because it has a lot more of a consistency to its color. The second floor of this build was originally going to be about 5 blocks lower than it currently is in the final version. I decided to move it up because in terms of measurements, it would have been lower than the overly exaggerated slider doors in the front, and I didn't want that. I wanted the second floor to be above those doors. So I moved it up a few blocks and basically chopped out what I had placed and moved the whole thing up. Now, as for the barn stalls on the right and left, I couldn't decide if I wanted to build them out of birch wood or oak wood, and in the end I ended up going with birch wood because not only did I think it looked better, but I also preferred the consistency. It bared enough consistency to the jungle wood pillars and beams that I had built, but it wasn't so far off that it looked too drastically different as far as the appearance of it goes. I wanted to use jungle logs on the internal supporting logs and pillars and beams because I wanted to have a bit of different color when it comes to the way the inside of it looks. I didn't want every single part of it to be oak logs or birch logs. I wanted to have a little bit of differences with the way it looked on the inside, just enough to keep your eye interested, so I changed it up slightly by introducing the jungle logs on the inside and leaving the external part of the build oak logs combined with a little ice on the front for good measure. As for the floor of the barn was originally all dirt, but in the end I decided to change it out for an entire stone floor with a few dirt patches here and there to kind of give it a little more variety so that the whole thing wouldn't look like a big bland stone piece. Originally, the second floor was going to be a lot bigger than the final result. The second floor was going to cover the entire section up where it has been built, as opposed to only being on the right and left and having a massive hole in the middle. The whole thing was originally supposed to be a solid piece, and I was planning on building some crates up there, but in the end I decided to remove them and instead put cactuses on the right and left walls and have a massive hole in the middle just to make it look a little more natural. I would say probably the hardest part of this build that I have completed was gathering the logs, the oak logs, to build the walls on the right and the left and the roof. That took the most time and the most effort, searching around for a oak wood forest to be able to harvest the logs from. And the transporting of those logs also took a little bit of time to get them back to the main base. I had to make multiple trips to multiple forests and basically exterminate the forest so I can use the wood to build my various structure. My glorious barn.